Everybody remembers the fish. Almost nobody talks about the fact that Jonah got angry when everything worked. And this is where the simple version of the story starts to crack. Jonah's story usually gets summarized very quickly. A prophet runs away, a storm appears, some sailors panic. Jonah gets thrown into the sea, a great fish swallows him. Jonah prays, God sends him back. And after taking possibly the longest route available to a very simple assignment, Jonah finally obeys. Nice. Run away. Get caught. Learn lesson. Do the job. Except that is not where the story ends. Because Jonah's strangest problem was not simply that he ran from the mission, it was what happened after he finally completed it. Jonah eventually went to Nineveh. He delivered the warning. The city listened, people responded, God showed mercy, and Jonah became furious, not because he failed. Jonah was angry because it worked. That changes everything. Normally, when a prophet warns an entire city, and the city actually takes him seriously, that would be considered a successful day. Message delivered, audience responds, disaster avoided, excellent. Jonah apparently preferred a less responsive audience. It is like someone delivering a project, watching the project succeed perfectly, and then complaining because the result helped exactly the person he did not want helped. Technically, the project worked. Unfortunately, Jonah hated the client. So the problem was not only fear, it was resentment toward mercy when mercy arrived at the wrong address. And Nineveh, in Jonah's mind, was definitely the wrong address. That makes the famous fish suddenly look less important, because Jonah had already received plenty of mercy himself. He had run from God. He had boarded a ship headed in the opposite direction. He had helped turn a normal voyage into a maritime emergency. He had been thrown overboard. Not exactly a strong week in prophetic leadership, and yet Jonah survived. He was rescued. He was given another chance. God did not abandon him after his failure. Jonah benefited from mercy before he ever walked into Nineveh. But when that same mercy moved toward people he despised, the whole idea suddenly became much less attractive. That is the uncomfortable part people often skip. They remember the storm. They remember the fish. They remember Jonah praying from the darkness. But the fish was not the most uncomfortable part of this story. The most uncomfortable part was watching a man who had survived because of mercy become angry when mercy did not stop with him. And that anger did not suddenly appear after Nineveh changed. The crack had been there before Jonah ever preached a word. Nineveh was not just another city, and Jonah was not running because he misunderstood the assignment. He understood something much more dangerous. He knew exactly what kind of God had sent him there. And that was the problem. Jonah did not suddenly hate mercy after Nineveh responded. The crack was already there before he ever reached the city. Nineveh was not neutral to him. It was an enemy, a threat, a symbol of violence. The kind of place Jonah did not want to see spared. And that changes the entire beginning of the story. Because Jonah did not run simply because he misunderstood what God wanted. He understood it very well. Possibly too well. God told Jonah to go to Nineveh and warn the city. Jonah heard the instruction, and then immediately went in the opposite direction. Not metaphorically, literally. If God said east, Jonah started looking for tickets west. That is usually treated as simple disobedience. God gave an order. Jonah refused, fair enough. But later, Jonah explains why he ran, and suddenly, the whole escape makes much more sense. Jonah knew God was compassionate. He knew God was patient. He knew God could forgive, and that was exactly the problem. Jonah was afraid that if Nineveh heard the warning and changed, God might actually spare them. Apparently, working for a merciful God becomes uncomfortable when he decides to be merciful to people you do not approve of. Of course, Jonah was not lacking information about God. He was struggling with what that information meant for his enemies. He wanted Nineveh judged. God wanted Nineveh warned. Those are not the same thing. A warning leaves room for a response, and a response leaves room for mercy. Jonah understood that equation before he ever stepped onto the ship. That is why his escape was more than fear. It was resistance. He was not simply saying, "I do not want to go there." He was effectively saying, "I do not want them to get the chance." It is like someone knowing the boss might give a second chance to a co-worker they despise, so they avoid the meeting entirely because they do not want to watch forgiveness happen. The problem is not confusion. The problem is the possibility of grace. Jonah had no difficulty believing that God could forgive. He had difficulty accepting who God might forgive. And that makes his earlier rescue even more ironic. Jonah had already been the man who needed another chance. He had already been the one running in the wrong direction. He had already been rescued from consequences he could not escape by himself. Mercy had been extremely useful when Jonah was the one sinking. But Nineveh, suddenly he wanted stricter standards. That is the crack beneath the entire story. Jonah wanted God's compassion to have boundaries that matched Jonah's own preferences. He wanted mercy available, just selectively, preferably for him, not for them. But God sent him to Nineveh anyway. The storm had not changed the destination. The fish had not changed the assignment. Jonah had been given another chance for one reason. He still had to go. So eventually, reluctantly, Jonah entered the city he never wanted to help. And then he finally preached. Then Jonah reaches Nineveh, and the warning works. This is where the story changes completely. No more running, no more storm, no more fish, no more prophet trying to escape the assignment. Jonah finally speaks. He walks into Nineveh and announces that judgment is coming. It is not a long speech, it is not especially gentle. There is no elaborate introduction, no inspiring conclusion, and definitely no motivational music. Nineveh is going down. That is basically the message. And somehow the city listens. People believe the warning. They begin to fast. They put on sackcloth. The response spreads through the city until even the king hears what Jonah has been saying. And the king does not laugh. He does not arrest Jonah. He does not tell everyone to ignore the strange foreign prophet walking around announcing destruction. Instead, he gets off his throne. He humbles himself, and he calls the city to change. Suddenly, the prophet who never wanted to come to Nineveh is watching something almost unbelievable happen. His message is being taken seriously, very seriously. Jonah warned them. They listened. The king responded. The city repented. For most prophets, this would be the moment where the music gets triumphant. Mission accomplished, people changed, disaster might be avoided. Everybody goes home happy. Well, almost everybody. Because Jonah does not celebrate. And that is the irony. Sometimes a person's heart is revealed not when they fail, but when they get exactly what they were supposed to want. Jonah had been sent to warn Nineveh. He warned Nineveh. Nineveh responded. That should have been good news. Instead, the success of the mission exposed the resentment that the failure had been hiding. It is like shouting that a house is on fire, watching everyone run out safely, and then getting annoyed because the house did not burn down with them inside. The warning worked, lives might be spared, and somehow Jonah was not thrilled. Apparently he preferred a slightly less responsive audience, maybe a few people ignoring him, maybe a stubborn king, maybe some dramatic resistance. Anything that would keep judgment comfortably on schedule. But Nineveh ruined that plan by actually listening. And this matters because Jonah can no longer blame his anger on the difficulty of the mission. He made it there. He preached. The city responded. The problem is no longer outside him. The problem is now visible inside him. Success did not cure Jonah's resentment. It exposed it. He did not simply want Nineveh to hear the warning. Some part of him wanted the warning to become reality. And now the possibility of mercy was getting very real. The city had changed course. The people had humbled themselves. The king had responded. Everything Jonah was sent to accomplish had happened. There was only one question left. What would God do? And when God looked at Nineveh and chose mercy instead of destruction, Jonah finally stopped hiding what he really thought. And this is where obedience stops looking like a happy ending. It becomes exposure. God sees what Nineveh has done. The city has responded. The people have changed course, and God does not bring the destruction Jonah announced. Nineveh is spared, and Jonah hates it. Not because the message failed, because mercy worked. That is the part that makes the whole story uncomfortable. Jonah had gone where he was told. He had delivered the warning. He had technically obeyed. But now the outside obedience finally reveals what had been happening inside him the entire time. Jonah wanted to be right about the judgment. God was interested in showing compassion. Those two things collided, and Jonah became angry. Very angry. He had no problem with mercy as a concept. He had already benefited from it. Storm, sea, fish, rescue, second chance. Jonah had basically been running on mercy for several chapters. But now Nineveh receives mercy too. Suddenly Jonah has concerns. Apparently grace is much easier to appreciate when your own name is on the package. Jonah complains to God. And in doing so, he finally says the quiet part out loud. This is why he ran in the first place. He knew God was gracious. He knew God was compassionate. He knew God was patient. He knew God might forgive Nineveh. And Jonah had not wanted to watch that happen. So this was never only a story about a prophet refusing an assignment. It was about a man who wanted some control over who deserved mercy. Jonah could accept compassion when he was sinking. He struggled with it when his enemies were standing. That is the irony. Jonah received mercy in the sea but became angry when Nineveh received mercy in the city. It is like accepting a second chance the moment you desperately need one, then protesting when the exact same chance is offered to someone you cannot stand. Mine makes sense. Theirs is unacceptable. Convenient system. Jonah had survived because God did not treat him only according to his failure. Now he wanted Nineveh treated according to theirs. And suddenly the famous part of the story is not the fish anymore. It should be this. Jonah, alive because of mercy, sitting there furious because mercy had kept other people alive too. That is far more revealing than running away. Anyone can look rebellious while running in the opposite direction. Jonah now looks obedient. He went, he preached, he finished the assignment, and he still does not want what God wants. The outside changed. The resentment did not. So God does something unexpected. He does not only deal with Nineveh, he starts dealing with Jonah. Because the city has already responded to the warning, now the prophet needs one, and Jonah is about to discover that this story was never only about whether Nineveh deserved mercy. It was also about whether Jonah understood mercy at all. Jonah warned Nineveh, and he hated the mercy that followed. By now, the pattern is impossible to miss. He received an order. He ran. God pursued him. Jonah prayed. He survived. He got another chance. He went to Nineveh. He preached. The city responded. God spared it. And Jonah got angry. The mission succeeded. The prophet did not. Because the real problem had never been only whether Jonah would go to Nineveh. The deeper question was what Jonah would do when God showed his enemies the same mercy Jonah had already received himself. And Jonah did not handle that well. At all. He wanted a merciful God when he was sinking beneath the sea. He was considerably less enthusiastic about a merciful God when Nineveh was standing on dry land. Apparently, mercy was excellent policy right up until it became transferable. Jonah wanted grace when his own failure had consequences. But when Nineveh faced consequences, suddenly consequences seemed very important, so God confronts him. And then comes one of the strangest little scenes in the entire story. Jonah leaves the city. He sits outside. He waits. Almost as if he still hopes destruction might happen after all. God provides a plant to give Jonah shade. Jonah loves the plant. For once, something in this story makes him very happy. Then the plant dies. Jonah is furious again. At this point, Jonah has shown more visible concern for a plant than for an entire city full of people. Subtle. God uses the moment to expose the contradiction. Jonah cares about something he did not create, did not grow, and had only enjoyed briefly, but he objects when God cares about Nineveh. That is where the story ends. Not with Jonah defeating an enemy, not with Jonah celebrating repentance, not even with Jonah clearly admitting he was wrong. It ends with a question. God points Jonah toward the people in the city and asks, essentially, if Jonah can care so much about a plant, why should God not care about them? And then the story stops. No neat resolution. No little scene where Jonah smiles, learns the lesson, and everybody walks into the sunset. Just the question. Because maybe the question was the point. Jonah had warned Nineveh. Nineveh listened. God showed mercy. And the success of the mission exposed the resentment Jonah had been carrying since the beginning. It is easy to love grace when it rescues you. It becomes harder when grace reaches someone you think should pay. Jonah celebrated the door opening when he needed to walk through it. Then he complained when the same door opened for his enemies. He preached the warning. Nineveh heard it. God showed mercy. And Jonah hated the very thing that had kept him alive. He survived because mercy reached him. But he became furious when mercy did not stop with him. Which misunderstood Bible story should be simplified next? Saul, Cain, or Elijah?